Hello and welcome back to Art Theoriez, YouTube's #1 channel for art theory related content. Smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, smash your keyboard, buy a new laptop. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today we're talking about Robert Hughes' book, The Shock of the New, written in 1980. Basically, The Shock of the New is the story of modern art, also known as modernism. Basically, it's art from like the late 1800s up until about 1960. And modern art was a very specific moment in art history, characterized by a breaking away from tradition and certain ideas like creativity, aesthetic innovation, artistic progress, and this utopian belief that art could change the world. So he starts by talking about the Impressionists, he talks about the Post-Impressionists, the Cubists, the Dada movement, the Futurists, Russian constructivism, and then he sort of moves on to abstract expressionism in America and a bit of pop art, and I think that's sort of where he leaves it. He does a really good job talking about each specific movement and what made them tick, what they cared about, why they did what they did, the historical factors which led to them thinking in the way they thought and making the kind of art that they made, and pointing out the tensions and the contradictions which were embedded within each art movement. He has absolute flair and like he's on fire when he talks about that stuff. It's just like he's in his element, and it's really readable and it's very enjoyable. And I felt like I learned a lot about certain movements like Dada or Futurism or Cubism, movements which I didn't know that much about, I knew a bit about, but it clarified a lot of things for me. And throughout the book, Hughes reflects on this idea of artistic progress. So in traditional art history, we learn that each movement builds on the innovations of the previous movement, and at first you've got Impressionism, and then the Post-Impressionists come along and they build on what the Impressionists did and create something better, and then you've got Cubism, which built on that further, and then Futurism and De Stijl, and then eventually you get to like abstract expressionism, and it's like the holy grail of art all of a sudden. But Hughes kind of doubts this, and he suggests that maybe every time something is gained in art history, something else is lost. Hughes reflects on this at the end of the book, claiming, "In art there is no progress, only fluctuations in intensity," which I thought was pretty deep. That being said, there are a few things about the book which a modern reader might find problematic. The main one being the fact that it is basically a history of white male artists from Europe and North America. However, there were a couple of occasions where Robert Hughes really surprised me by saying something unexpectedly woke. For example, he criticizes Picasso for cultural appropriation, and I didn't really see it coming, to be honest, but he talks about how Picasso took inspiration from African sculptures and African masks, and that this is what led to Picasso's breakthrough Cubist painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And Hughes tells it like it is. He criticizes Picasso for not understanding the history or the culture that the African masks came from, and for basically stealing their aesthetics. Hughes states that the African carvings were an exploitable resource like copper or palm oil, and Picasso's use of them was a kind of cultural plunder. Hughes goes on to describe Cubism as a dainty parody of the imperial model. I don't know, I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't really expect it from an old white art historian who was writing in the 80s. But despite his critique of colonialism within modern art, he never stops to reflect on why his own account of art history only includes white male artists, which I think is a bit strange. Also, he only really writes about painting and architecture. He doesn't really talk about sculpture that much. He barely mentions photography at all, which is strange because those were also parts of modernism. And he really struggles when you get to postmodern art because he tries to talk about art of the 60s and 70s, but he doesn't really understand it that well. And I feel like he claims a lot of it is bad, but actually he just doesn't really understand it. So is it worth reading? I personally would still recommend this book because when he's talking about art movements from the first half of the 20th century. He is absolutely on fire. He just has so much flair and eloquence, and it's an absolute pleasure to read. It's also very readable and easy to understand, so it's quite a good introduction for people who don't necessarily have an art history background. But that being said, it has to be read with a critical mind, and we have to remember that it is a biased art history of only white men. And sometimes he is weirdly woke, and you got to give him credit for that and appreciate those moments when they come around. He also made this book into a TV series, which is quite long. You can watch it. Maybe you could watch it while you're cooking or something. I wouldn't exactly sit down with popcorn and watch it, but I'll link it below because it's quite nice. If you have read the book or watched the TV series and your opinion differs from mine, let me know down below. I'd love to have a conversation about it. Thank you for watching.